crisis team training is the training that was created for schools, preferably who've had prepare. So this will make a lot more sense to someone who has had prepare. People who have not had prepare can take this training. It just requires a little bit more explanation for them. And since most of us have had prepare who are here today, so I won't spend probably as much time, and it's probably not going to be a full 3 hours. I assume it'll be a little bit faster because of being on Zoom and also being just you guys have all been trained. But I think it's really important for you to have this training so you know what other districts are being trained as, you're aware of the resources that we have available, and that you're aware of how you might refer a district to these resources that are available. Before we do that, I do want to talk to you. I just want to share with you our data that we've been collecting. Oh, one more thing before that. There are 3 new people who are going to join our team. I see one of them right now. I see Michelle Butler. She is going to be joining the team and is going to get some training. She's currently on the student support team in the alternative education division. She's going to join our team, and we have a couple of more. We have Sharon Morgan, who might pop in here in a little bit, and Rachel Johnston is going to join our team as well. So if you guys have colleagues that might be wanting to join our team, please send them to me. I will be putting together a training. We kind of had tentatively set it for December, but I think we're going to push it out until next spring when we have a little bit more capacity. And we are getting 10 new people as trainer of trainers in early January. And I'm super excited about that. And some of you guys are on board here today. So thank you guys for participating in that. And we're just going to get started. The first thing I'm going to do is share my screen. And I'm going to show you the data that we have right now, because I think that is pretty important. Come on, share, baby, share. Okay. Okay, the crisis team response data. You guys can see this, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to show you kind of what we have so far, where we are today. So this is the 2021 data, as you can see right here. We had 98 responses last year. 2022 has been a little bit maybe not quite as intense, but and mostly I would say the summer is the reason why it wasn't for the little bit down in numbers. But we've had 86 responses so far this year. We've had 186 total responses since we started recording in February of 21. Call only would be like if I heard of a crisis and reached out and then they didn't want help or they thought they were okay. We've initiated our team to go in person 55 times. We've had 211 students involved. We've provided psychological first aid for 417 people. We have been utilized in person as a team 141 times. Well, that's 141 people. We've responded to 22 homicides, 24 suicides, 71 elementary schools, 65 middle schools, 91 high schools. Other would be like the administration building or something different. Staff deaths, we've had 39, COVID, 18. We've responded to 110 districts, which it just gets more and more, which is exciting to me. We've seen violent or criminal death or act 37 times, motor vehicle accident 38 times, sexual assault 5 times, suicidal ideation or attempt or self-harm. That is when it's a non-completion, 9 times when somebody just reaches out for support. Other death, 42, and natural disaster, tornado, flood, fire, etc., 12 times. So the other interesting data that I've started collecting is crisis by type. And I think this data is really interesting. I've broken it down since we started recording data through last month. So the 2 from this month are not on here yet. But this is how we break down our responses. We've had 13% have been suicide completions, almost 5% attempts, 20% have been violent criminal death or act. about the same number, 20% motor vehicle accidents. COVID, almost 10%. Sexual assault, almost 3%. Natural disaster, 6.5%. And then everything else makes up for the 22.28%. So the total violent criminal acts has been 22.82%. I think that's a pretty interesting breakdown. And I think it's important to share with you so you can see kind of what the responses have looked like. Frozen. Okay, there I'm back. My crisis line doesn't ring very often. The vast majority of these responses has been me reaching out to a school when I hear from one of you or somebody else, or I see it on the news or see it on social media. I follow a lot of different school district social media pages because of this, and I will reach out the vast majority of the time. So do you guys have any questions or thoughts about this data that I just shared with you? Okie dokie. Okay, well, let's do this. The packet that I sent you is a companion document. These resources were created with Prepare as a framework, and they're companion resources to go with Prepare. So I did email those to you. I did drop them in the chat. If you still need them, say something in the chat, and I think Jackie might be able to at least upload the packet for you. So, okay, let's do this. Okay, so I give everybody my information. We talk always in our training about the crisis team and you all. And I always tell them what a fabulous team of professionals that you are, and that this is the training this is the response we can offer. We talk about what the response is like and what it could be. And we always give them that information. And this is the slide that I show them about. We offer as little or as much support as they want or need, everything from resources and consultation to in-person support. And it only has happened one time so far since I've been on the team where we've struggled to find someone to go. We've struggled to find many people to go, but we've only had one time where I thought we weren't going to be able to send anyone. And Amy actually popped in and was able to do that. This last one, right after Thanksgiving break, I was sick. Many of you were sick or otherwise occupied. So I'm really proud that we've always been able to find people to go. And I just want to say again, how much I appreciate you all stepping up when that happens. And when you are able to stop what you're doing and going to help other schools, it's very meaningful to me. And it's extremely meaningful to the school. So thank you very much for doing that. I talked to them about training and how they can get any kind of training at the State Department and how to ask for training. And then right now we're going to just review Prepare. I think this is going to be a good refresher for you all as well. And we'll do a little participation. So as you know, workshop 1 is the comprehensive school safety planning and prevention through recovery. It's the broad overview appropriate for really all school officials and employees. And then workshop 2 is the two-day workshop that's interventions from mental health crisis. And it is a great workshop for anyone who's going to be a first responder from mental health in Prepare. I do want to just tell you guys, my budget is dwindling quickly with my grant. I think as of today, I have about $14,000 left in my supply budget to fund materials for our schools for the rest of the year, and that's going to go really fast. So if you do know of a school who wants Prepare or a district, they need to contact me like today to get on the list so I have enough money in my budget for them. So I want to continue to be able to offer that free service for training, but it is dwindling. And then Prepare, like all good things in education, is an acronym. We're talking about preventing, reaffirming, evaluating, providing, responding, and examining. And yeah, it's I talk about the golden rule. The golden rule of crisis, as you know, is do no harm. And it's very critical that that is the goal anytime you respond to a crisis. However, I have never been to a crisis response that's perfect. It just doesn't happen. It's the nature of crisis where things and decisions have to be made quickly, and things happen. There's no perfect response. There are ways to be better prepared, and obviously this training is one of them, but there is no perfect response. I have seen a lot of very well-meaning individuals do something harmful unintentionally in a crisis. I still hear of things all the time. Just recently, we had a school announce on the intercom about a student death, even though we had talked about it. And that to the person doing it, I'm sure was the best option. I think I'm frozen again. Okay, there I am. We know that the best practice is to not do that, and we understand why. So we talk about how important it is to do no harm. Even when you have the best intentions, doing no harm is critical. So the 5 mission areas of preparedness for the United States, not just for prepare, are prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. We hit all of those in workshop 1. We talk about all of those things. And in workshop 2, we really focus on the response and recovery. And it is so critical for schools, especially anytime they have a crisis. For the recovery portion, I think it's a portion that's overlooked a lot because schools are busy and they have to get back into their daily grind as fast as possible. And it's an expectation and a need for the students. But recovery is also a process, and it is important to look at that process and make sure that recovery is happening appropriately. So here's a refresher on the incident command. And so hopefully you all are familiar with this, that you remember this a little bit. Just as a reminder, the incident command system was created post 9/11 after different departments were responding to the Twin Towers. The fire departments were responding, and even in the same New York Fire Department, they had different codes and different language and different things that they were communicating with, and they could not communicate well with each other. So this national system was created as a response system. So Prepare uses this response system too, and I think it's very appropriate. The only thing different about Prepare's incident command system is the addition of a mental health officer. So let's just, as a reminder, talk about these positions. Incident commander is the person who makes all the important quick decisions. This person is delegating a lot. They're kind of leading the crisis response. And it's extremely important that you have someone in that position who can make decisions quickly, and delegate. So who might an incident commander be in a crisis that we respond to? Who might that be? Participation. Who might an incident commander be? What person on a staff might be an incident commander?
Superintendent or principal?
Yep, superintendent or principal, definitely. Especially if it's a bigger crisis. Who else?
In a smaller school district, maybe a counselor?
Possibly, depending on the situation. It could be really anybody in the building, and it just depends. So if you have a big crisis, let's say there's a death of a staff member or a student, your incident commander is probably somebody in charge, like the principal or like the superintendent. If it's Tommy breaking his arm on the playground at lunch, who might your incident commander be in that situation?
The duty teacher.
Yeah, the duty teacher. It could be them. Could be the nurse, right? It could be the nurse who's in charge. It could be the principal who runs out. It just depends on the situation. It's also important to recognize when we are going to schools that their incident command system could look way different at a small school than it does at a big school. And there's obviously a lot more players at a big school, but the incident command system could look different too. And especially at a small school, you could have one person wearing many hats, or in a smaller response, one person could be wearing many hats. So the public information officer is a critical part of this team. This is the person who's in charge of the social media. They're in charge of adapting scripts to get messages out to staff and families. This person, if there is a media connection, would be in charge of working with the media. In a larger district, they're going to have a communications director or somebody in that type of position who is going to be able to do that. In a smaller district, this is largely left on the shoulders of the superintendent. So it's important to consider that it could be different based on the response size and on the size of the district. The safety officer, who is an obvious safety officer in a school district?
School resource officer.
Yep, SRO for sure. A lot of our schools have SROs now, but not all of them. Not all schools have SROs. In a smaller situation, who would be someone in your building who would have keys to all the doors that might not have a different responsibility in a crisis?
Custodian?
Yeah, you're right, the custodian. In Sandy Hook, which has been many years ago now, about this time of year, the custodian actually helped save multiple lives because when the shooting started, he went around and locked all the classroom doors, and was kind of a hero. So it's important, I think, to remember to have custodians a part of that team, right? Liaison officer is someone who works directly with the community or people who want to help in some way, or liaison officer might reach out. They may be the one working with the emergency officials, fire, police, ambulance, or they may be working with churches or volunteers in some way, communicating with the community and expressing needs and getting needs. The mental health officer, and this is about a third of our team, are LMHPs who can respond to a crisis. Either you're a licensed school counselor or a school psychologist, or you're maybe even a licensed provider. This person, the mental health officer, may play the role of being a mental health provider in a crisis. I know when our mental health folks go out, generally speaking, we are triaging and talking with kids and staff, but it could happen in a larger scale event that the mental health officer is only watching out for the mental health providers. And that person's job would be to make sure the mental health providers are getting what they need and responding in an appropriate way as well. And maybe almost triaging the mental health responders. So it just depends again on the size of the operation, on if the mental health officer is going to be a responder themselves or not. So it should be someone with a mental health background in this position. Now, I've been to schools that don't have counselors at all. So if that's the case, they're going to really rely on whoever comes in to help in that situation. So then the bottom of the food chain, essentially the flow chart, are the people who are in the field doing the work. They're the operations, the doers. What might some of the doers or the operations team do in a crisis? This is a big part of our team when we show up. What would a doer do? Which
They
sounds
cover
redundant.
classrooms, they can pass out water or handle food, or those Maslow's basic hierarchy of needs.
Yes, perfect. They are the people who are doing some of the other behind the scenes work, right? And they're very critical to the successful operation of a response. The planning, the thinkers are people who can make decisions. It's important to have people who can make decisions on this team. And they don't wait until the end of the day to make a decision for tomorrow's response. They're deciding in the morning what tomorrow is going to look like, right? They're planning and thinking about the response, and they're able to make decisions. Sticks to getters, just that. They're maybe getting supplies or running errands or getting the things that the people need in the response. And of course, the finance, the payers, and let's just all give a hallelujah that we are not that in a crisis response. It's an extremely important role in a crisis response, and one that people don't think about a lot is somebody's got to write the checks and pay the bills because crisis responses are costly sometimes. So those are those people. So does anybody have any thoughts, questions about the incident command system? Do you guys feel familiar enough with it? Okie dokie. I see there's things happening in the chat. Let me look. Oh, awesome. You guys are answering in a chat. I didn't see. Yay. Okay. So in the incident command system, one of the documents that is in your packet is the incident command system roles and flowchart. And in this incident command system roles and flowchart, what I've done is I've taken the prepare definitions and it actually gives you the roles and the definition of the role. It is also gives you a little flowchart. It's the same one in prepare, but Jackie just did it all fancy for us in our documentation. I thank you, Jackie. It has a few definitions like what is the incident command system and what is a unified command. But this is a very helpful tool for schools who don't know what it is, or maybe there's people on the team, on their crisis team who haven't been prepared, trained, and don't know. So one thing Jackie suggested, and I think it's a great addition, is when we get into it, we do have checklists that we've created, and each of the checklists broken down by position has the definition of the role on it. So literally in a crisis, somebody would just be able to hand it to the person. Jackie sent you the link in the chat. They just hand the sheet to the person, what their job responsibilities at minimum are, and it has their definition on it. And it's a really quick way to get the role out to the right person and assign roles. So, okie dokie. So we talk about this too, levels of response. It's important to know, depending on the crisis, depending on the district, it's going to vary. So not every response is going to need every position, right? And sometimes, like we talked about earlier, one person's going to play multiple roles. Sometimes the response needs a bigger presence based on the capacity, and this is when we come in to help. District size matters a lot in response. We talk about that we're going to talk about the difference between regional, district level, building level, and minimal responses. Well, a smaller district gets to regional way faster than a larger district because larger districts have more capacity in their district to handle a crisis. So that's important to know. I just set this up perfect. So there are 4 levels of response, and they go from minimal to regional level, essentially. So who can think of what would a minimal response be in a crisis? What would a minimal response be? Okay, a class pet dies, a great example. Maybe a lockdown. Yeah, a class pet dying would definitely be potentially a minimal response to just that class, right? What else might it be? These are good examples. Broken arm on the playground, a great example. It is a crisis, but it is a minimal response. Good job, guys. So what would a building level response be? What might that be? Maybe your whole building. Probably a lockdown would probably fit more in this one. Yeah, maybe a fire alarm. Food poisoning, that's a good one. That's the one I hate talking about whenever we do training, is food poisoning. But a flood or a gas leak, yeah, those would be all probably building level responses where you're not necessarily bringing anyone in from the district to respond, but you're handling it in your building. Great. What might a district level response be? Could be a natural disaster, student death, or teacher death. Yeah, definitely could be a district level response. So how is that different from a regional response? What would a regional level response? And any regional level response is when people from the outside are coming in to support the school or the district. So what might a regional level response be? Tornado, school shooting, absolutely. Large natural disaster, we did respond to the tornadoes in southeastern Oklahoma this year, and 4 districts were affected. So yeah, chemical plant disaster, a large car incident, including students from multiple schools, or like Quintishumingo had their terrible tragedy last year when several students died in one car wreck. Sand Springs had the same thing this year. So yeah, something like that. So anytime we're bringing in some people from the outside, it's a regional level. And as you can imagine, a regional level response at a large school district is very different than a smaller school district. So if at a smaller school district, they need help faster because they don't have the resources necessarily built in locally, and they're bringing in their mental health partner, they may be bringing in our team, they may be bringing people from other school districts in. And a larger regional level, I can think of like Moore, for example, they pretty much handle their own crises. Anytime I hear about it, of course, I reach out. They mostly handle their own things, but I can think of a few times that they have had regional level responses in tornadoes. And they did have a regional level response when the cross-country students were hit and killed. And so it just depends on the size of the district and their resources on each of these things, but it's important just to refresh on those. So how do you know how to respond? How do we make the decision as a district? How does our team make a decision on what the response should look like? Now, I really hang my hat on this process and this protocol right here. The impact of the crisis is critical to evaluate these 4 areas of predictability. The more unpredictable it is, the bigger impact it has, right? The duration, the longer it lasts, the bigger the impact. The consequence, if death is involved, that is a bigger impact. And the intensity, the bigger the intensity, the bigger the impact. So I share whenever I teach this to my schools about a response that we had, and some of you were there, where we responded to Bethel and last year, and they had their in their early childhood building, it was PK through 2, and their head cafeteria worker was killed in a car wreck over the weekend. And when the superintendent called me, he said, bring everybody, you got to bring everybody. This is a huge deal. Bring all the people. She had a daughter in the high school. We got to bring all the people. And so in my head, thinking about looking at this, the predictability, duration, consequences, and intensity, I'm thinking, well, I mean, obviously a death of a staff member is a serious situation, but she's the head cafeteria worker. Really, what is the impact going to be? Not a teacher, not a student. So we did bring 5 people. We sent 2 people to the high school where her daughter was, and we also sent 3 people to the early elementary school. Well, when we got to the early elementary school, there were people from counselors from other school districts, and there were 14 Ministerial Alliance folks there from churches across the area. They had no training in school crisis response, and they had no real background in school crisis response, and they had no background checks from the school district. So I was a little bit panicked about it, and I was texting my boss saying, I think we have an over response here. Let's see what happens. So we moved through the morning, and I'm thinking we're going to have too many people. And it turns out one of our team members brought a student to me and said the students had been writing cards to the family of the woman who had died. And she brings a card to me, and instead of a sympathy card, this child has drawn a very graphic drawing of the scene of the crash. So upon talking to this child, we discover that she and her sister had both witnessed the crash themselves, and that many people had come to the accident scene. It was a fiery crash, and the car caught on fire. And as you can imagine, this child drew some very graphic pictures of that scene. So that immediately upped the consequences of the circumstance. Additionally, we found out the drivers of the other car were teenagers who were suspected of drunk driving. We also found out that this cafeteria worker had a relationship with literally every child in the building, knew every one of their names, had close relationships with the staff in the building, had grown up in the district and lived in the community her entire life. So my thought at the beginning was, this is going to be maybe a medium-sized response, grew into a much larger 2-day response where we used literally every single person who responded in a big impacting way. So just because you think this is the response initially, it could change in the course of your response. So that's important to consider too when you are out responding to a school. You may get there, and usually what I've noticed is when we respond to schools, we end up staying half a day because there's not much for us to do. And that's okay. I would rather us be there and leave early than not be there at all. And it's very important for the school district and the people of the school for us to be there. But sometimes you get to a school and the response is bigger than we thought. And it's important that you let us know if you're there by yourself or you're maybe not with your other team, that you tell someone if you need help so we can bring in more people and figure out how that needs to go. Any questions about crisis impact? All right. So we talk about how big is the response, and then we talk about our annexes. And just as a quick reminder, I'm going to run through these quickly, what our annexes are. Security. And remember, security, you're looking at physical and psychological safety. So it's not just your physical safety, it's your psychological safety. When I was at a large suburban district before coming to the State Department, we had a high school senior killed in a drive-by shooting in May. And we thought we'd probably need a lot of support. And actually, I brought in the State Department team to come and respond to this crisis. We had counselors from all over our district who came. We set up in the auditorium because that's where we thought we were going to need that space because we thought the response would be so big. And I also called my friend John Parker at the State Department and said, hey, can you come do security for us? And he did security to make sure that there weren't going to be any outside things coming in that might not be good to the situation, especially since it was a school shoot or a drive-by shooting. So in that response, they read the script as we've directed them to do, and we start waiting and we wait and we wait and we wait for kids to come in. And the entire day we had 2 kids come into the crisis station, completely unanticipated for me. And talking to those 2 kids, the concern from the students was nobody wanted to snitch on who might have done the shooting. So they didn't come. So me telling you that story is to show you the impact of security and feeling safe. And it's really important that we do that. So accounting for all persons is the next one. It is one that they use all the time in schools. It's basically accounting for people in a crisis. So they practice this all the time in fire drills, tornado drills, all kinds of drills. I think I'm frozen again. Okay, there I am. Do you know a child in a fire at a school during a school day? It was like in the 1950s, because we figured it out, right? We figured out how to do drills and how to practice and how to exit. And it's something that we have figured out. And so that one is one that's easy for them because they're kind of already doing it and they know how to do that. Communications and warning. What does a communication system look like at a school? How are they giving warnings that a crisis may be occurring? And evacuation, we talk about the 2 types of evacuation, and what might an evacuation be? When might a school evacuate? A fire, yeah. Or a gas leak. Anything else you guys can think of? A flood, yeah. It could be some sort of inside crisis that caused them to go out. And then we talk about a reverse evacuation. And this is kind of a no-brainer for people, but they didn't realize there was a term for it. So what might a reverse evacuation be? Where instead of putting kids from outside to in, you're bringing kids inside from outside. I said it wrong. Instead of kids going from inside to out, you're bringing kids from outside to in. What might need to happen in that one? Intruder on the playground, crisis at another school. Yep. Weather event during recess or outside. Yep. You guys are absolutely right. Those are all good examples of a reverse evacuation. Shelter in place and lockdown are pretty similar in some ways, but different. And the fact shelter in place is what a lot of schools call lockout or secure perimeter, where they're keeping things from the outside from coming in. They're staying sheltering in place. And it could also be a tornado drill or a tornado. It could be something where they're trying to stay sheltered in the building, as opposed to a lockdown. We all know what a lockdown is, unfortunately. We've probably all practiced or even been through one ourselves, where you're hiding and being quiet. So that's different. And we talk about terminology and how important it is to use the correct and same terminology all the time that's as least confusing as possible for your school people. We talk about reunification. Excuse me. Reunification is a huge annex and it's very complicated. I do want you to know that I did meet with Edmond Public Schools, who are actually going to do a mock reunification program. And I will invite you whenever it happens so you guys can watch one happen if you're interested in coming. They also used a training from the I Love You Guys Foundation on reunification that I got to watch them present. And it is a much better, a more in-depth, it's about an hour-long training on reunification. The I Love You Guys Foundation has other tools for reunification as well. That's easy to use, and it's all free resources. So we talk about how critical it is and how important it is to have a plan ahead of time and have memorandums of understanding or agreements with your external place that you might have to reunify at. And also how it's important not to tell people ahead of time, like your family ahead of time, where that will be. So you wait until the day of the crisis and you choose your location, and then you tell families where they are once the kids are there and safe. So it's important to know that. We know public health, medical, and mental health are an important annex to look at. And then recovery and continuity of operations, two annexes that are really important. Continuity of operations, that's things like, where am I going to have school going forward? Who's going to pay the payroll check? How are my data systems going to be running? That type of thing. And recovery is also, what does it look like to truly recover from a crisis? I think about more, both after some of their really, really big crises, they received some national funding to bring in counselors to their building, LPCs, LMFTs, social workers, to come into their building to provide continual counseling for their students. They had contracts with other outside counseling. They had groups that they did. What does that recovery process truly look like for a school going forward? So annexes are really important to refresh, and we talk about those. So we talk about, once your physical safety is secure, how do you ensure psychological safety for your students, staff, and community? And this is really the refresher part for workshop 2. And we go into, of course, the tiered intervention levels, the multi-tiered system of support, which we all know and love, social support, psychological education, and psychological intervention, with social support being a tier 1 intervention that is for all students, psychological education being really a tier 2, sometimes tier 1, mostly a tier 2 intervention for some students, and psychological intervention being a tier 3 intervention for a few students, just like a multi-tiered system of support. So we talk about some warning signs that may occur, and this is straight again from Prepare. And we talk about this triage. We talk about what triage is, and triage is basically checking to see what the needs are of the students or the staff members involved. You're just like a medical triage would be, you're doing a primary triage initially before you ever set foot back in the building. If a crisis happens in the evening, you're thinking ahead of time, who are going to be the people most affected? Is there a club or an athletic team that are going to be deeply affected? Or what about the students in the class? What about the friend group? You're thinking about those things ahead of time and making plans for those students ahead of time. Your secondary is the day of the response, you're delivering interventions. You're looking at things like risk factors and early warning signs, of course, and you're trying to just make some decisions about what these students need based on who they are, what their needs are. And then referral. That's our tier 3 intervention mostly in a crisis response. Just to be clear with you all, I'm never going to expect you to provide therapeutic counseling to anyone in a crisis. That's never going to be the expectation. It's not even appropriate in a crisis to do that. Our tier 3 intervention is a referral. We refer out to maybe another long-term counseling situation. I've actually been on crisis responses, and I know some of you have too, where we've actually had to send kids for mental health evaluations the same day based on their needs and their statement of being suicidal. So that is a tier 3 intervention, and that is the third level of referral. So, and then we look, of course, at the MTSS of a school crisis response, and we talk about what are these. So tier 1, we've got obviously the classroom meeting whenever you're reading the script and you're talking to your students in your class about the crisis that's happened. There's a lot of other tier 1 interventions that we haven't even taken a deep dive to explore, like caregiver trainings. We can teach schools how to give caregiver trainings in a crisis. I think it's important for schools to do that before a crisis and what it looks like. You have better attendance in a crisis, but that is definitely an option. Resources, we talk about resources. I send out a ton of resources all the time to schools based on the request and what the situation is. We have so many different types of resources that are specific to type of crisis. So if you have a situation that you know of where there is a specific need, let me know and I can get those specified resources to groups. And then we talk about tier 2, individual crisis intervention or triage, group crisis intervention, and it's really the practicing of stabilization, psychoeducational groups, et cetera. And then tier 3 is referral, almost always is a tier 3 intervention. Any questions so far? Okay. We talk about social support. What is a social support for a secondary student? Who are their social supports?
Peer groups.
Yeah, peer groups. They want to be with their friends in a crisis, right? That's who they desire to be with. And elementary, a lot of the time, their social support is mainly their family, their parents, extended family and relatives. Sometimes it's family for, well, it is family for secondary too, but initially, like the day of a crisis, the kids really want to be together. What does that look like? What is a care station? We talk about that and what that looks like. Ooh. Do it. Hello. Okay. And we talk about reuniting. Oh, good. I'm glad you guys are glad we're doing this. Reuniting with primary caregivers and siblings as a basic strategy for social support. Reuniting with peers and teachers. Returning to the familiar routine. I think it's a lot of people will just make the assumption that everybody needs support during a crisis, and that's not always true. We talk about to schools, it's so important that instead of pushing into the classroom, that we have the option for students to come out of the classroom to get the support that they need, because some students really need to get back to their familiar routine and do the work. That is how they're coping with the crisis. So that's why we don't always push in, we do pull out. And then empowering caregivers with information, things like, what can you expect from your child? What does grief look like? Providing information like that. So empowering the caregivers. We do have a new document on care stations and psychological first aid. Care station essentially is the location that we have students come out to us where we're triaging students. A lot of times it's a library or an empty classroom or another space that's not being used for any other purpose that day. And Jackie linked this here. It's also in your packet. We talk about the care station and what is a care station? What do you need to supply a care station? What is triage? And then what is psychological first aid? It's basically what we're doing as responders to students or staff in a triage situation where we're trying to check what is psychological first aid? What do they need immediately? And then I link the guide to the psychological first aid guide for people in the care station document. So we talk a long time about that. Some schools do this really well, and some schools it's a new concept for. So whenever I send school resources, I always send this document along because I think it's important to consider what is a care station and how to do it appropriately to cause the do no harm aspect. We talk about psychological education, and I'm excited to tell you, we talk about these, the informational documents, caregiver trainings, classroom meetings, and student psychoeducational groups. We don't get invited a lot to do the psychological education groups, but they're really important, especially in a larger response. And NASP has a brand new tool. If you are a trainer, you should download their newest training PowerPoint, because this tool is in it now and it wasn't when I first started training. It is actually a what's the word? A curriculum, that's the word I'm looking for 4 levels: primary grades, upper elementary, middle school, and high school, and then enrichment lessons. And it's a lesson you can go through. It's already written for you that you can go through with a psychoeducational group of students. And it's a great tool. I've looked at it. It's really robust, and it is now available on the NASP website. And I'm pretty sure anybody can access it, not just people who've paid for NASP for Prepare. So it's a great document. I'm happy that we get to share that one. So in psychoeducational groups, you're talking about things like, what can I expect in my grief? You know, how long is this terrible feeling going to last? What is my experience with this situation? Oh, the QR code's not working. That's so disappointing. Okay, I'll reach out to NASP. Okay. That happens sometimes with some of the NASP documents. So thank you for letting me know, Mandy. But the psychoeducational group is kind of that information. It's more of a teaching, less like a school processing session or a grief group. It's more of a teaching from an educated LMHP or individual about how to respond to crisis, what they can expect, etc. Anybody else have anything they want to throw in, especially those trainers out there, about psychoeducational groups?
Hey, Michelle, since this is such a good resource, are you able, will it let you on the PowerPoint, like copy and paste that link in there?
I will send you this document. How about I will send it to you.
Perfect. Thank you. I
That
love
makes
this.
sense
This
a
is
lot.
this looks like it's a good resource. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm glad you told me the link, the QR code isn't working. That's disappointing. So anybody else want to add anything about psychoeducational groups? Okay. Then we talk about psychological intervention and what that looks like, and how our goal in triage is to stabilize a person. And I think the next slide is that. Nope, it's talking about this. Tier 2 and tier 3 stabilization is the goal, to get them to a place of homeostasis as much as possible, and what that looks like. So really a tier 3 intervention, again, is a referral after stabilization. And so the next thing is we talk about stabilization and what that is. And it's basically where someone is disoriented or dysregulated. We want to provide them stability and regulation, at least temporarily, right? So we talk about what this looks like and what they might see, in a student who is dysregulated or who is disoriented or overwhelmed. I know how this feels. I have been that person, and I assume most of you have experienced a crisis in your life where you felt dysregulated or disoriented. And truth be told, since my dad passed away almost a year ago, there have been many times that I have felt dysregulated and disoriented. And it's gotten fewer and farther between, but it is a feeling that I'm familiar with. And most people are familiar with this feeling when you relate it to them in that way. So we talk about that. And then the next part, I have them talk about triage and triage summary sheet, which you all should be using anytime you go out to a crisis. Basically, it's to document the students that you talk to. It's so important that we document it, not just for our records, but also for the school's ability to respond. There are risk categories and statuses down at the bottom for us to be able to fill in for our students. And that's based on just talking to them. And it gives you the opportunity to put information such as they have a pre-existing mental illness, or they were witnesses to the situation that we might not know, like that student in Bethel. We didn't know she was a witness until she drew the drawing that she drew. And I'm so glad she did, so we would know, because that can change the way we respond. It also lets the people making the decisions for day 2 response know, and going forward, when do I need to check on this child or this staff member? Does it need to be the same day? Does it need to be that evening? Does it need to be tomorrow or the next week or the next month or irregularly? It gives the people making those decisions information so they are able to make those decisions. It's also really important to go over the crisis triage summary sheet at the end of your response with someone, whether it's a debriefing at the end of the day, or if it's just a one-on-one conversation with the counselor in the building or whomever that might be. It's important to share that information with the people there. So it's important that we use this crisis triage summary sheet every time that we respond. And then I'm not going to ask you guys to do this because I don't even know how I would. We give them 2 role plays. We have them get partnered up. And the first role play, partner 1, is the student who is in middle school, just found out a friend who they were with, they'd grown apart from, had died in a car wreck, and they come to the care station upset. And partner 2 is the care station counselor, and they're trying to stabilize the student. And so I always give people in the training the option to not participate in case it hits a little too close to home, and we talk about that. And then I also tell them the next scenario is much different and probably more serious. So they do this stabilization, they do a role play, they talk about it. And then the next one is much more serious. It's a high school student whose best friend just died by suicide. The student was the last person who talked to their friend, and they told them they were thinking of suicide. And a teacher brought this child to a care station. And then we do that role play, and then we process through those. How are they different? What was different about them? What did you suggest in the first role play and the second? And what would the follow-up be? So just knowing that, just talking about those 2 different situations, if you were responding and ran into each of these situations, how would you respond differently in the situations? Would it be the same exact response, or would you respond differently, and how would that be? Yes. Can we go back to the slide? So we can. This is the role play 2. I'll give you a second to look at it. And this is role play 1. Okay, so how would we respond differently? Yeah, the intensity is different, and its age appropriateness would be different, right? So the intensity would be different for sure. Proximity is different, absolutely. So one person who didn't really have any contact with the person who died versus the person who was intimately involved and close to the person. And Sarah says role play 2 would potentially need more ongoing support, absolutely. But both could need support. So I agree with that. Both could probably need support, but you also might make a decision about, are you sending them back to class that day? And for the role play number 1, depending on their reaction, of course, you're going to depend on the reaction. Yes, you probably want to get them back to class. Role play 2, I would have zero expectation for them to return to class that day or maybe the next few days, and working with their school to make sure they're getting the support that they need. So really good points. And they're obviously very different responses. There's going to also be a lot of feelings potentially of guilt with either of the role plays. And it's just going to be on a different varying level. So it's just important to consider that I do these 2 vastly different ones because you can get the same, those 2 types of vastly different responses in the same response you go to, right? Because one person's proximity to the situation is different than the other person's. So that's important to consider. Anything else about these role plays? So we normally take a break here. Do you guys want to keep going? We're not taking as long as 3. It's not going to be 3 hours, but do you guys want to keep going or take a short break? Keep rolling, go, keep going. Okay, we're going to keep going. All right, so we already had that one. Why is it going backwards? Okay, so now the document that I gave you is really going to come in important because we're going to be going through the documentation that's been created to be partner documents with this training and with Prepare. So if you'll look in your packets, there are 2 different role plays. There is a role play by order of operations. In other words, we put together a role play by you do this first in a crisis, then this second, then this third, and it's not by position. It is just by the order. And it's rough, like it's a suggested order. It's not always going to go quite like that, but it's suggested. It's on pages 14 through 19. It does say, and Jackie just linked it here for you, it does say what position on the crisis team would have this role and responsibility, or it is a suggested role and responsibility. The second one is the one we're going to actually go over. And it is the checklist by role. So it's broken down by position, and the order, it is in order of, or rough order of the expectation, but it is by position. And the one that is linked there, I'm sure Jackie is going to link it here in just a second, she's on top of it, is also going to have the definition of the role with it. So let's take a look at that one, this checklist. If I can make my computer work. Okay. So the role of the principal and superintendent upon first finding out that there is a crisis that's happened. Obviously notifying the superintendent is extremely important. I do want to say I did talk to a school recently. They had a crisis in the middle of the day where a student died in a car wreck on the way to school. And they called me absolutely panicked, as you would. And I'm talking to them and about the response. And I'm like, wait, has this been verified by law enforcement? And they said, no, not yet. And I said, how do you know that this person died? And they told me that a teacher at the school was behind the accident when it happened. And she was sure that the person had died. I'm like, time out. Before you go into any kind of notification or this process, you have to get verification that there was a fatality and who died. So I think it's important, if you do run into a situation with a school that contacts you or reaches out, make sure they're getting law enforcement verification or parent verification that the person has died, or family verification. Yeah, Amy?
Well, I was just gonna kind of run a quick scenario by you regarding that because it was something that we experienced in Woodward a couple of years and see kind of what you think. So there was a house fire and they confirmed that there were bodies in the fire. We knew who lived there. None of the children showed up for school, but our school resource officer, because it was a fire, they said, we cannot make identification until the remains are sent to the state medical examiner, and it could take up to 2 weeks to verify that this was who it was. So we were kind of stuck in a very odd position because we didn't have law enforcement or medical examiner verification that that's who had passed, but the family lived there. The entire family was unaccounted for. So what would you suggest in that situation? Because it really, we had our law enforcement officer was like, absolutely, you cannot tell anybody that, these children have passed, but everyone saw you could see the fire for miles around Woodward, and
So I
it was
think that's what I would
presumed.
say. We know that there has been a fire at this family's house. We know that there have been fatalities involved. Although that we do not have a confirmed identification, we suspect that the situation is not good. And until they're identified, we can't provide more information, but this is what we know at the time.
Okay, that's kind of what we did, but after you said that, I got to thinking about that situation and if we had really handled it appropriately or not. But
it's a great point, Amy, because there are so many different varying situations in crisis that every single situation has to be handled uniquely and decisions have to be made at the time. Would any of the other folks have anything to add to Amy's question or thoughts on that? Okay, good question. Thanks for asking it. So when we talk about a crisis response with a principal or a superintendent, we want to give them a quick checklist of what to do, things that you really have to do in a crisis situation for it to go smoothly. Will they always do this or in this order? No, but it is a guideline that they can use, and they can modify this to fit their needs of their district, which I always encourage. I'm always going to say, your staff, your kids, your families better than me, and you have to make the right decision based on that information. But immediately we want them to determine who the incident commander is in the situation. Is it going to be the principal or superintendent? Is it going to be somebody else that they have to bring in? We don't know. So we really want them to identify an incident commander. We need to get them to notify their building staff that there is going to be an emergency staff meeting before school. We hold the emergency staff meeting. You go over the crisis script that we do have scripts that I'll show you today, and let them know the important information like where the care station will be. Don't do interviews with the media, encourage subs for those who need it, etc. Like those basic pieces of information are really important. They may do other things in that meeting, and that's okay because it's their staff and they know, but those things really need to happen. We encourage them to, along with the school counselor, reach out to the family of the deceased, whoever that might look like, and determine who is the best contact for the family. Maybe there's a teacher who has a really special relationship with that family, or an office staff member or an assistant principal or someone. And then at some point, maybe not immediately, but at some point, is the funeral going to be open? May we attend? May students attend? And then be sure, it's really important to update your faculty and staff on all things happening with this. It can be an easy thing to forget to do in a crisis, to be updating your faculty and your staff, but it is critically important. It is a sure way to really hurt feelings and upset your faculty and staff when you don't communicate. So it's really important to do that. So the next one is the incident commanders slide. It's the biggest one, obviously. The first thing we tell them to do is determine the key factors on the impact: predictability, duration, consequences, and intensity. To then set up incident command. What does that look like? Yes, Jackie says, as a former sub, don't forget to inform your subs. that is obviously very critical. Thank you, Jackie, for throwing that in there. Set up incident command. Where will it be? Who will be on your immediate team? Who's going to be that PIO, that safety officer? Ooh. Oh no. Sorry. There is a missing autistic child in Norman. So that's what that was. So if you're in the Norman area, you just got an alert. So it gives me chills. That makes me very sad. Okay. You want to determine who those key players are in your response. You want to determine what crisis annexes are needed. If they are needed, and these are decisions that are happening like this. This is not something that you take a lot of time to do. You're making quick decisions. So whoever your incident commander is needs to be able to make quick decisions and be as unemotionally attached as possible and as professional as possible. You're going to call immediate meeting of the building crisis team or your district crisis team. You're going to distribute scripts for the phone calls. You're going to work with school officials to consider special populations. For example, do you have students with disabilities? Is notifying them the same way appropriate? What about proximity to the student? Who are their close friends? Who are their athletic teams or club members or classmates? How are they going to be deeply affected? How are you going to talk to them differently than just getting a script read to them in their first hour at the same time? I've definitely, as a responder, got that wrong before, and wish I could have a do-over, but you can't. So this is a checklist for those purposes. How are we going to notify students in person? What should that be? And I have in there, never an overhead announcement or a large assembly. Never do that. That's a never. Please don't ever do that. And we talk about why in the training. Work with all staff to simultaneously have faculty members read your crisis script to students. And guys, I am always telling schools, telling your staff the morning of a crisis that they're going to have to read a script should not be the first time they hear that if there's a crisis, they're going to need to read a script. That information should come to them long before a crisis ever happens, so that you have the opportunity to explain to them why that is important. Be kind to your staff. Let them know why we're going to ask you to read this script in first hour, not just the morning of a crisis for the first time, because it's hard to understand, especially if you're deeply affected yourself. And that just gives a little advice about that. Working with all staff members to coordinate the reading of the script, not letting a sub read a script, stepping in for someone who is maybe a sub. Continually monitor the progress of the crisis team and help. Working with school officials to assess school returning to regular routine, what that can look like, when that should happen. Updating faculty and staff. Continuing to monitor the annexes, because that could change. There could be a new annex activated or something like that, and what maybe future annexes might be. We're talking about disseminating a script to parents. And these are actually linked in the documents themselves. It's not showing up linked here for some reason, but they are linked. What is the policy to let students to go to funerals? If there's a parent meeting needed, I mean, can be a really tough decision on whether you have a parent meeting depending on the situation, because you don't want to open it up to a forum to bash someone or something, but providing information might be appropriate. You've got to consider it. Developing material or gathering material to send out to families or to have on your website, to provide staff guidance and talking points. What can I say about the situation, right? We know we want to dispel as many rumors as possible, but what does that actually look like to dispel a rumor? What information should we be providing to people to reduce the rumor mill? Monitoring social media, and then just making sure that it's happening. So those are just a quick guideline for them. There's going to obviously be other things they have to do, but those are the reminders of things they really need to do. Your SRO, it's a short list, but it's a big job. Ensuring the scene is safe for staff and students, first and foremost. And then remembering its physical and psychological safety. And then verifying the death, obviously, if at all possible. Liaison officer, again, some of these lists are shorter. What it's going to happen when you send out that information to parents, a lot of times is there's going to be a flood of parents at your school there to pick up their kids. What should that look like? Contacting and updating the appropriate community services if you need to liaise with your mental health partner in the community to come in, or if you want to make sure there is a lunch provided for your teachers, who are you going to contact? Hopefully it's an arrangement you've made in advance with that group. So that's that. And then the mental health officer obviously has a lot of roles and responsibilities too. You're going to work with the crisis team. They're going to probably be on the crisis team and identifying who are those proximity people that are close, those special populations. Arrange for a counselor or team member to follow the class of the student who died or the teacher who died, follow that student's schedule or stay in that teacher's classroom for the day and have a counselor just on site just in case. Working with the logistics team to set up the care station, and having those crisis triage summary sheets are important, and making sure it's stocked well with water and fidgets and markers and crayons and tissues, etc. Working with the crisis team counselors to perform a crisis assessment of vulnerable students. Meeting with all students needing assistance in the care station. Holding an end of the day debrief for all mental health professionals, principals, school counselors, and other key individuals. Extremely important that mental health officer leads that, so you can talk about what the needs are of the students and the staff and what the plan is for going forward. Reviewing those crisis triage summary sheets, working with school officials to monitor the most affected staff. Okay, the operations team, check to see if items need to be collected from a locker or athletic facilities. Also in an elementary classroom, and we're going to talk more about this part in a little bit. You know, what are you going to do with the desk? What about the seating charts, etc.? Who answers the phone? What should they say? We have a script, making sure they have that. Working that with early dismissal of students if it needs to happen. Be knowledgeable about where to send students to the care station, etc. Answering questions, referring calls to district public relations, etc. The planning team, be sure to watch out for memorials. We have some more guidance coming up on that. Plan for the recovery and identify long-term needs that might be happening. And what does tomorrow look like, essentially? What do the weeks look like? Logistics, I think it's important to have a hospitality room for the teachers, like maybe in their lounge with food and snacks, etc. And manages logistics of location, staffing, protocol for dismissing, etc. to care stations. In a perfect world, you have enough people to walk students from a classroom to a care station where they're not just having to go by themselves. So managing that as well is important. And then two things that are really important: notifying the district administrators and principals of siblings are in another school and notifying those past schools that they've attended, and removing the student from the roster. This has to be done immediately before you send any notification to parents, so the parent doesn't get a notification about their own child who's passed away, or to get emergency alerts, etc. It's a very critical situation that you get that child removed from the roster. So that is registered somewhere in this checklist.
Michelle, I do want to speak to that real quick.
Yeah.
Another thing, when you're thinking of the student getting removed from the roster, and I'm just going to use this example from Sand Springs, the attendance clerks that have to do that, the attendance clerk that had to remove 3 students from the roster, I happened to be walking through the hall and she was having a breakdown. And she realized, I didn't realize it was going to be so hard to do that. So I guess just as responders, just making sure you're checking in on, because a lot of the times those are staff that can't leave their location.
That's a great point, Mandy. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, that's such a hard job for whomever has to do that, whether it's at the district level or at the site level. Checking on those folks, super important. And people may have a relationship with a student or a staff member who died that you're not aware of. So keeping your eyes open and ears open on checking on people is really important in a crisis. Thank you, Mandy. And then for everyone, be knowledgeable about the care station and how that process works. Be knowledgeable on with guidance and talking points and how to answer questions and rumors. For example, if you say someone died unexpectedly and a student asks you in class, did the person die by suicide? How are you going to answer that? Providing those things, those words for your staff member is really important. Know how to direct calls to the district public relations office and be knowledgeable about the care stations. So that is that checklist. It's not comprehensive, but it is a starting point for schools. And I think if somebody were to hand that to me in a crisis, I'm going to be much better equipped to remember what I need to do, especially if it's my own site, because they're traumatic. Crises are traumatic. And especially when you're affected, to have something like that, I think would be really helpful. So that is in your packet. It is, Jackie did send the links. It is on our website for anybody who needs it. So we do have 4 scripts, and I'm going to break out of here and show those to you. Can you guys see my document now? Okay. So my scripts are on page 32.
Sorry, Michelle, we still see the PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you. Let me stop and share this differently then. Just a second. Share my desktop. Okay. So, where am I? I'm almost there. Okay. So we use these scripts. They were adapted from another national organization. They are evidence and research based. And we have 4 different scripts that anybody can access. You can send these linked anytime. That gives them a basic script for when they have to do something like answer the phone and provide some examples. So it's important for the people who are your frontline staff to have this so they know how to respond, because parents will be calling. I mean, any of us who worked in a school know that. So that's that script for answering the phone. This crisis script is to read to students. What does that look like? You know, what does, reading that script look like for students? This one is the letter to parents and guardians. And we advise that if you're notifying students without notifying parents first, the parents are notified simultaneously. In best case scenarios, you're wanting to notify parents before you notify kids, if the night before, if you can, so that parents have the opportunity to address it with their children if possible. It's not always possible, but if possible, it is important to do that. And then if you have to, if it's over spring break or if it's over a long weekend and you have to notify your staff member in some way other than an in-person meeting, this is a template for that as well. So those are those crisis scripts that they can use. And again, there are examples here. Anybody have any questions about that? Okay, let me switch this real quick to this one. Picking back up. Okay. Now I want to talk about the Crisis Quick Action Guide. This document, for lack of a better description, is a document that I took all of the trainings that I've had on all the crisis situations through Prepare, Mental Health First Aid for Youth, Lifelines, SOS, all the things, and all the experiences that I've had. And I tried to put a quick action guide together for people to know what to do in a situation. So I'm going to change my screen again, because I think I'll just rather go through it with you. Okay. Okay. Okay, so the quick action guide again is just kind of a place where I put all my thoughts on crisis. I feel like this is a living document. So if you have suggestions for this document, please email me after this and let me know. I'm always willing to update it, make a change if needed based on everybody's suggestion, etc. So in this document, there are links to all the things we've been talking about so far, and some more guidance. So the first section is announcing a crisis. We've talked about the crisis scripts already. So that is the first thing we're talking about, why it's important to do scripts, how to do a classroom announcement, and how important it is to dispel rumors. What we know about dispelling rumors is providing as much factual information as we can is important. And that is appropriate, because that will lead to fewer rumors, and rumors can be really damaging and cause a lot of harm. So things to avoid. Obviously, I talk about assemblies and overhead announcements. I've been to schools where both have happened, and it is a terrible situation. I usually, and when I do provide this training, would provide examples of being in a situation where that's happened and the damage that it causes. So, and why it's important not to do those things. So I think you guys probably know that. You want as much control over your environment as possible in a crisis announcement. And when you have a large group of people together, or it's on the overhead, you don't have as much control. So you want to have the control of the situation. So the next section is caring for students and staff. We talk about care stations, and we also have that document that we refer to, but that's just a little blip about it. Classroom activities following a crisis. It gives a little bit of guidance on that. You don't want to talk about death or read a book that has death in it right away. Give it a little bit of time. Having a flexible day, opening your classroom to conversation about it, what that looks like. And then having some structured activity for the students who need it. I offer a couple of different activity ideas. It's a very typical thing that we do, especially at the elementary level, and sometimes even at the high school and middle school level, depending on the situation, is writing for the students to make cards for the family. These must be screened carefully before giving to the family, for the very reason I talked about at Bethel when the student drew the picture. Or a student saying something that might be hurtful and completely unintentionally. So you just want to screen those. I talk about posters and how it's really, you got to be really careful with anything posted publicly. It has to be monitored all the time, because what if a student walked up to it and wrote, I'm going to join you soon, and didn't sign it? How would you know? If there's another suicidal student, how would you know who it was if you weren't monitoring it? So that's a big risk. I know a lot of places do that, but I think it's a really big risk. And I want people to think about that before they have kids sign a poster or something public. So a little bit of guidance about desk lockers and classrooms. And I do want to share with you one thing that happened with the desk. Yes.
Can I add one thing just real quick? I went to some training like this, some national training for this very similarly in Boston many years ago. And one of the things they brought up were the sweatshirts that the kids make, where, rest in peace, so-and-so, all that kind of stuff, and how that actually encourages other students to do a similar act.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would want my name on a sweatshirt, or I would want the corner of the school to have my picture and all sorts of candles and flowers and stuff like that on it. Not connecting that you're going to be dead and you're not going to get to see all of that, or the sweatshirts or anything like that. So they suggested that you encourage students not to wear those sweatshirts to school, and not to allow memorials to be set up in the building.
We have a whole section of memorials in this document, and we talk about it, and there's some actually additional documents on memorials that provides that guidance, but that's a good point. So for a desk, especially at an elementary level, we suggest that teachers remove the desk and have a new seating chart where desks are moved. However, I have talked to schools, and I want to share an example. Had a school that they really didn't want to move the desk. So I talked to them at length about why we recommend to remove the desk and how it could become a memorial. And they came up with a great compromise that I wanted to share with you. The teacher felt like that the desk really needed to be in there the first day after the crisis, and then she would remove it. But she went ahead and made a new seating chart, and then she moved that student's desk somewhere else so students could write cards to the student and they put it on the desk. And then the next day the desk was moved. And I don't know that that's the choice I would personally make in that situation, but I thought it was a great compromise. They did understand why having a desk there long-term might cause a problem. In a classroom, you want to, if it's a secondary classroom, you definitely want a new seating chart. And I suggest moving the desks around. So nobody is knowingly sitting in the desk of the student who passed away. Lockers, removing the contents of a locker when students are not present at school, and watching for spontaneous memorials. And then classroom guidance for if a teacher dies, that's really tough. You've got to make a decision ahead of time. How long are we going to keep her classroom set up with her things? When we remove the things, who's going to remove it? What's that going to look like? What will the students' input be? It's just thinking through things like that with a classroom. We talk about tracking students with a crisis triage summary sheet. We talk about providing duty or classroom coverage when needed, if a teacher needs help, or what we can do to support the teacher. We talk about external volunteers and background checks. I can't express that enough, that those volunteers who show up at your school who want to help, have great intentions, right, to do no harm, sometimes can cause harm if they don't have the appropriate training. I mean, I've had pastors talk to students about faith-related things, and it wasn't initiated by the student, and that's not okay. We've also had pastors who say, I don't really know what to do, because school crisis response is so unique. So it's important to consider that ahead of time, train those volunteers ahead of time, and get those people background checked ahead of time before a crisis occurs. We talk about bringing lunch in for a staff the day of a crisis and working with your PTA or a church group or some group ahead of time before the crisis to make that MOU or that arrangement. So when the crisis happens, you can make the phone call and they say, yep, we're on it. Talking about PFA, psychological first aid, and we refer to the sheet on that. Talking about stocking with snacks, water, and tissue, special populations, students with special needs. We've already talked about this. Here's that guidance on subs that Jackie was referring to. If you have a sub in your building, make sure they know what's going on. And that there's been a crisis, and not putting them in a position to have to read a script. Sub plans are important, but you've got to make a decision sometimes to let someone else step in and be with that class that the kids are familiar with, or someone who's trained. So that substitute plan is really important. Therapy dogs. We have some ideas to put out some more guidance on therapy dogs in the future. This is a big topic, but we give a little bit of guidance in this situation. Consider reaching out to a therapy dog organization who has certification and training, and not just allowing people to bring their pets to school. There's a lot of problems that could occur in that situation, especially if they're not certified or insured in that capacity. So just being thoughtful about that. So, and then we have a lot of guidance on memorials and out of school events and funerals. I'm not going to go through all of this here, but I'm going to hit a few key points. Letting students go to funerals, not having a funeral at school. I heard a great example of a good plan on this. A lot of times, rural schools, the biggest location in the whole town is the school gym. And a lot of times that's where people want to hold funerals. But as you can imagine, it can be re-traumatizing to people, especially students or staff members who are there all the time. So I heard of school districts maybe partnering with a nearby rural school district to have the funeral at the other school district's gym instead of their gym, because they're not in there all the time. And I thought that was a great solution to that problem. But not having it at school is pretty important, because it can be real triggering. Memorials at school, the key is do no harm, right? We got to make sure that they do no harm. And we do have some a sample memorial policy that we put out. We want people to have a policy on memorials. There's a lot of guidance for memorials. And like Michelle was saying, you have to be so careful for what you allow to happen in your school. Talking about different types of memorials after a suicide are a whole nother thing you have to take into consideration. If you get a question about memorials, please send them to me or Cheryl, and we can guide them through best practices of memorials. It's tricky, guys. The safest thing to say is don't allow them, because it's pretty safe to do that, to not allow them. But some schools really do. And I mean, I think about Moore, who has multiple permanent memorials at their sites, and you just have to make a decision that's best for your district at the time. It's complicated. It gives the difference between permanent, semi-permanent, renewable, or living or temporary memorials, and the cautions that you should take with each of them. Things to consider. Recently I went to Deer Creek, where they had a memorial committee, and there were memorials on the campus that the superintendent didn't even know about that had been created for people. There's also a huge concern with equity in memorials. Sometimes a student, this happened to me actually when I was a high school student. There was a car crash that killed 2 students that I would have graduated with. One of them was very popular and one of them was not. And handling a memorial for each of them is going to be different, the way it happens based on just that information, but also thinking about equity. And if a student dies whose family is in poverty, they can't maybe afford the same permanent memorial that another student's family might. So just taking all of those things into consideration, it's a really big deal. Memorials are very complicated and a big deal, and giving as much guidance as we can to schools on that is critically important, and is a huge part of this guide. I also mentioned out of school time crisis events. That would be like a balloon release or candlelight vigil or something not held at the school property, not during school time. You know, if as a counselor, I like to go to those to see the temperature of my kids and my staff, and see what happened at those. So I would be aware. I'm not saying that you should require anyone to go to those, but I'm saying you at least want to know what happened at it and what it was like there. And so having somebody to at least be able to inform you of that would be really important, I think, for providing the appropriate response that you need. Okay, the next section is preparation and recovery. We have crisis go bags, which are actually linked in your document as well. And we have 2 different ones that we've created. One is for the crisis team, and one is for the classroom. And we may or may not be getting crisis team go bags from Aware that they've been ordered, but there's, it's the state. So who knows if and when we'll get those. But Lori has done a lot of work, and Cheryl has done a lot of work to get those go bags. So thank you to the Aware team and Lori and Cheryl specifically for putting in all that work behind the scenes on those. We also provide a list of suggested items for a classroom go bag, and working with maybe the documents talk about working with maybe your PTA or a church, or somehow raising those items so you don't have to buy them yourselves, because it could get expensive. We have a section on the annexes, crisis team training that we provide, debriefing. That's one of the documents that's coming next. Is I'll create a whole document on debriefing, because it's so critical. Prepare training, the crisis toolkit, which we have at the State Department, and then of course some references. Any questions about this document? It's not comprehensive. So as you think of things that we could add to this document, would you please let me know? I'm very open to adding, editing, whatever you guys think. but this document does exist. And anytime a school is in crisis, I always send them this document. This is the packet that you have. This is all the things that are in there. The summary sheets in there, all the things that we've talked about today. So those are all in there. Okay, I'm gonna go back to sharing in the other way. Okay, so we did. So what I have them do when we're in person is read each section, discuss it at their table, and then we come back and discuss it as a group. But then that wouldn't really work for us today, so we didn't do it that way. So we talk about the go bag. I show them, here's the go bag for the crisis team. This is kind of some of the things that you're going to be getting if you get those go bags. And then the classroom go bag is here too. And it tells them what page it's on. We talked briefly about the school processing session. This is another resource we have in our crisis toolkit about what it looks like to gather together and a like group. You don't want best friends in the same group as acquaintances. They want to be a like group with like experiences and processing through whatever has happened. We've done this really successfully with adults at different school sites. We've done this. I've also had this go terribly wrong. Lori was with me where we tried to do one of these in a district and it was not good, but we learned from it. So if you want to do a school processing session, let's talk about it before you do it, because I've made some mistakes and I've learned from those. So be sure to talk to me about it before you do it. This just shows them our toolkit. So we have a lot of new documents on our toolkit. You may not, and we've gone through them today. And that's the main purpose of wanting to show you this. So you had the access to those resources. We have a lot of different documents, a lot of things that we've created, a lot of more things coming. We just want them to know that it's there. We also have information on suicide and self-harm. We have information on child abuse. We have information on homicidal threats and ideation. And we have information on sexual assault and dating violence, memorials, and other resources. So we have a pretty robust crisis toolkit. It gets bigger all the time because we keep finding new things to share and to add as we're able to do that. So any questions? We got through the training much faster than we would have otherwise. So I'm glad that we did that. Let me open up the chat again. Any questions? Any concerns, any thoughts, any comments? Was this a thumbs up training for you guys or a thumbs down training?
Michelle, I really appreciated it. When I don't get the chance to respond very often being in the department I'm in and a couple of times a year. So I think a refresher is really important for somebody like me.
Great. I'm so glad that it worked out. Just so you know, I am able to go out and provide this training to school districts. We did host 2 regional ones, and those were very successful too. I think we'll probably do it again in the spring to do this crisis team training. When it's in person and when it's not with you guys, it takes about 3 hours, maybe not quite. So it takes about 3 hours. So I really wanted to get you guys trained in this so you could know what we're talking about and that you understand the resources that we've set up and provided, because you could very well be in a response situation or in communication with one of your schools who needs quick help and that you can connect them with it. The other exciting thing I want to tell you about is Utah's State Department of Education reached out to me last week and said, hey, we saw this training that you created and we saw your documents and we want to use it and model some of our stuff after it. And then we had a face-to-face over Zoom meeting. And I think we're going to work together to start a consortium of state education association crisis responders. So I think that's pretty exciting because nothing like that exists right now. And they're really on board with it. I'm excited about it, have been thinking about it. So if you happen to know of another state education association crisis responder, please let me know because I want to reach out to them. We're compiling a list of those people and those departments, and I would love to be able to reach out to them. So, and just to make our practices better. Because school crisis is so weird. It's such an unusual thing. You know, there's nothing quite like it. So I am so deeply appreciative of all the work that you guys put in, that you took time today to come to this training, to learn more about the resources we offer. I'm sorry that we weren't together today. We will be the next time. I'll make sure of it. We'll have lunch together. If you want to have lunch with someone who is close to you now, go have lunch with them and enjoy yourselves. If not, get back to the grind. You guys are awesome. You're a great team. And again, if you know someone who wants to join our team or is interested, let me know so I can reach out. And I see Heather Johnson. Hi, Heather. Thank you for joining us today. Heather's going to be one of our new team members too. So, okay, that's all I have. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Michelle.